Well, I'll start. I am Sarah Stewart Holland. I am the co-host of Pantsuit Politics and the Nuanced Life and the co-author of I Think You're Wrong, but I'm listening to Guide to Grace-Filled Conversations with Beth Silvers. Wait, I'm trying to point to, I don't know how your boxes are. I don't even know if that works. Whatever. Pantsuit Politics started because we wanted to have a type of political conversation we did not see anywhere else. We didn't see it on CNN. We saw this sort of just partisan, I don't even think debate's the right word for it. Sounding board, maybe, is a better description of what we saw. And what we really wanted to do was have a connected conversation. And so, we started talking in 2015, and then the political environment began to change and continued to change very dramatically over the next several years. And, over time, we learned that it's really centering the relationship between the two of us, taking care when we spoke with one another, having an approach that centered curiosity and a belief that no side has a monopoly on truth or what is right. And, that was sort of our beginning foundation. We talked about nuance a lot. But then, I think as the political environment shifted, we shifted. I mean, Beth shifted in her political identification. We began to explore, okay, what are the boundaries? What are the actual no negotiation topics? What do we do when we bump up against a no negotiation topic? How do we make sure that those that are marginalized or typically excluded can be centered in their perspectives given the weight that they deserve? And so, I think that over time, an approach that started with the idea that, civility and compromise were always the goal and always available, really shifted over time. And it's not that we don't still prioritize connection and curiosity, but we have found a way to also prioritize the importance of never dehumanizing our fellow citizens. But sometimes that's all that's available to us, right? It's I'm just going to maintain your humanity and my humanity, but there might not be much else we can agree on. And so, I think that has been in response to, like I said, a really dramatically changing political environment. But it has been, I think much needed for the two of us and much needed for our audience with increasing polarization and just the stakes rising constantly. I think polarization, sometimes when they say that, sounds like we're just it's just describing the environment, as if the polarization isn't a result of the stakes getting higher and higher and higher. And so I think that has been much needed for us and for our audience. And we hope that the lessons we've learned along the way are valuable to others as well.
So our breakdown, when we began, I was a registered Republican, Sarah was a registered Democrat. She had a long political history. I brought more of a business perspective to our duo. We still have, I think, a very different philosophy about what the federal government exists to do. So we use this metaphor of a car. When it comes to a big problem in society, Sarah wants to bring the big power of the federal government to it. She's the accelerator on using that tool. And my perspective is to be more the brake on using that tool. Here are the unexpected consequences of using the federal government to solve problems. Here's how that sometimes overlooks people in different parts of the United States. When it comes to private industry, I'm the accelerator. Go, go, go. Let's turn people loose. They want to make some money. That will help motivate people to get to good solutions. And Sarah is the brakes. Look at what happens when private industry goes unregulated. Look at what happens when money as a motivator becomes perverse and changes the incentives in a way that hurts people. And so what we've learned through talking to each other about that particular breakdown is that we both belong in the car. And both of those perspectives are needed. And so a healthy progressive perspective and a healthy conservative perspective can be very good for the country. We've also tried to be really honest on the show. And I've tried to be really honest in my life that I don't see that perspective represented in the way that I mean it through the Republican Party anymore. So I did change my registration last year to become a Democrat, and we don't profess to be a perfect left-right representation. We never profess to be a perfect left-right representation, but we particularly don't here in 2020 because the nature of that spectrum has shifted so much. So this is what we try to do in all of our work, bring a lot of transparency and honesty to the discussion without either of us feeling the need to be completely in ownership of one political perspective. We're just showing up as humans, trying to do the best we can. We care about our country. We assume everybody else does too. And we really want to stay in relationship with people of a variety of political perspectives because we do think all of those perspectives can bring something important to the discussion. But we also have some really clear places where we say, you know, this person is welcome, but this idea is not. And we try to be honest about that as well. So I know that you all shared a little bit of background about what's happening amongst your colleagues. We would love to hear more about that and how we can be helpful to you.
Not all at once now.
Seth, do you want to go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think I'll bear the honor because it, quite frankly, revolves a lot around my organization. So I'm Seth Smitherman. I'm the president of the Federalist Society chapter at UT, and I mean, just generally, I think a lot of the tone and language about the Federalist Society is changed, specifically during this presidency. And it's just become so much more visible, and it's become a subject of public criticism. And I think that has filtered its way into law schools. And I mean, I know I can only represent the political angle and the jurisprudential angle that I come from. Kylie is as well a Federalist Society officer, so we kind of represent that contingent of the law school. And I think we've definitely seen a marked change in tone, and just towards the organization in general. And I think it's become very clear to me that people don't really see us as legitimate, and certainly don't welcome us on campus. So I think, coming from a conservative perspective, that's how I perceive the problem. I know I don't see the problem for what it fully is, though, so I don't want to leave it there. So Rhea or Alyssa, y'all are welcome to hop in there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Gordon. I'm one of the co-executive directors for Law Students for Black Lives here on campus. And I mean, just to go off of what Seth was saying, I too have been feeling that there's been a lot of controversy and a lot of, I guess, strife going on in our law school community. And with FedSoc specifically, I'm really happy to be here because I know I'm gonna gain a lot of insight from this conversation. But I mean, just to dive right into the questions that I had, I don't understand how you could separate an individual from an institution that they stand for, like FedSoc, for example, when if you personally believe that that institution as a unit is something that you are diametrically opposed to. And I mean, especially when by supporting an institution, you actively contribute to and perpetuate some of its harmful effects. And I guess just navigating that for me is what's been hardest, because I don't understand how you could separate one person from the whole thing when they embody the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Well, I can start there, because the first example that comes to mind is that my father wants me to do that for every liberal progressive celebrity on planet Earth. He wants me to, because I'm a registered Democrat, be responsible for every registered Democrat on planet Earth. And every time a registered Democrat does something that he finds disagreeable or abhorrent, he wants me to answer for that. And I always say, I can't do that. I can't be responsible for everybody on my side. Like, I cannot do that. That's too much to carry. Now, that's a big organization, growing bigger by the day. And that's a big example. But I think it's helpful in that I always try to think, okay, I'm doing this. And I think this came honestly from my law school training. Whenever I engage in so my father is of the opposite political persuasion, in case you couldn't tell from that example. And I always think, like, what would happen if he did this to me? Or what do I do this to him, and is he doing it to me? And I think, that we all do it. We all do it. And I think it's even part of find the extreme example and say, see, isn't that the reason this is wrong? And even when it holds truth, even when the person, like you said, embodies the institution and everything, you disagree with it. When I started, even when that holds truth, even when the celebrity my father is holding up to me, I might agree with them. I think the important thing is, what it took me way too long to learn, is it just doesn't work. Like, if I want to connect with the person and influence the person, that type of argument doesn't work. It just sets up defensiveness. And that sort of backing someone into a corner and saying, how could you? Because I feel that a lot daily. How could you? And what I've found over many, many years is just, how could you is not a conversation starter. It's a conversation ender. And the only way to influence someone is through conversation. And I have to feel my how could you. I'm not saying you shouldn't feel that. I'm just saying that starting with how could you doesn't take us anywhere, really. It's a dead end.
Would you all mind to talk to us a little bit about the context in which this conflict arises? Is this happening in your classes? Is it happening as you plan events in the law school? Like, I'd like to understand a little bit more about where this feeling that you have, that both parties have here, where that starts to materialize, just so we can give you feedback that is relevant to that context.
So I think the feelings have always been there. I think, especially like in person, they were always there. There was always kind of animosity in my experience, from both sides towards both groups. I think part of it that gets exacerbated right now is, when we were in the law school, we could have a lot of these conversations face to face. And it was really easy for me to go up to Seth, for example, and be like, hey, like, let's talk about this. And I think what happens now is that most of our conversations happen digitally. And like, if you're lucky, it's through Zoom and it can be sort of face to face. But a lot of times it's happening through text messages or group me's, and in platforms where there is no like human connection. It's very much sending text messages or through online platforms. And I think that also leads me to what you were saying, is like, how do we use these digital platforms to like have civilized conversations? And I think we would love to get y'all's perspective on that. But also kind of going back to what Alyssa and Seth were talking about, I know Professor Collis and Professor Dickerson are professors in the law school. And I think we're really interested in what they have to say about this environment and how we as students in the building can help navigate this a little more too.
So,
Go ahead.
No, the course that I teach, although it's actually come up quite a bit this year in my civil procedure class, but where it comes up the most is in the course I was mentioning to you all before we started chatting as a group, and that is the course that I teach on the middle class. So it is impossible to teach a course on the middle class without it being controversial in almost every single class. We talk about public education, K-12. We talk about the sort of divide that we're seeing in colleges. We talk about housing. And when you talk about home ownership, you can't avoid talking about things that happened in the past, whether it's racial redlining or block busting techniques. And so one of the things that I put it in my syllabus, and I say it in the class, is you don't have to agree with your classmates or the views that they express, but you have to disagree in a way that is not disagreeable. And so we have had each week, I break the class randomly into different small groups. So everybody at some point is going to be stuck in a small group for a chunk of time, and you're going to have to figure out some way to get along with each other. The very first year I think I taught it, I had two hardcore libertarians.
Oh, Lord.
It was a moment at the end of the year that I couldn't have scripted. Each small group had to answer a question that was either generated by me at the beginning of the semester, by students at the end. So we were talking about racial disparities sort of generally. And, why is it always that, women and people of color, and I forget the other group, always typically have the profile the worst economically and financially? So I forget the question that we had, but the one group started, well, first, we have to talk about systemic racism, because the reason that we have all of these problems, and he gives this very impassioned discussion on behalf of the small group. And then my white male libertarian raises his hand, and I'm thinking, well, we'll see how this goes. And he said, I think the problem is, if you really want to eliminate a lot of the problems in the Black community, you need to decriminalize drugs. Because the problem is, if you keep throwing young Black and Latino males in prison, what a surprise. And he just gave this coming from a totally different political perspective. They ended at the same place. And when he finished, I looked at him and I said, yeah, didn't see that coming. And the whole room burst out laughing, because we'd spent the year with him sort of being somewhat of a contrarian. So at least for me, I set a very clear and distinct tone at the beginning of the class and reinforce it as many ways and as many times as I need to, that all topics we can take on, but it's not going to devolve into, unfortunately, what we've been seeing for the last couple of years in our public discourse.
So are most of these conflicts taking place in class?
Oh, yeah. Are you talking about
Okay.
to the students or for me?
Yeah, because I wasn't sure if there was like conflict about the group's presence on campus or activities or any of that, or if it was mostly in class.
So I think it's a little bit of both, but currently it's been a lot through social media platforms and mass messaging platforms relating to events that are being put on by different organizations.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, when I was in law school, I think so many of these conflicts, even when we were face to face, came because we had two different purposes. One person was speaking and their objective was to be heard. Their objective was, I have a perspective that is missing from this conversation. I have a life experience that many people in this room do not understand, and particularly the person I am in conflict with, and I want them to hear me. And the other person was taking the role of, I'm being a dispassionate debater, and I am trying to prove a point. And I think so many times in my life, when I was the most frustrated and the most hurt in these sorts of conflicts around these types of topics, is because I was the person that just desperately wanted to be heard. I wanted my experience validated. I wanted to hear, I'm sorry that happened to you. I understand that that's not an experience I had, and it's valuable that I can hear yours. And the other person was trying to like poke holes in my policy argument. And I think that that is such a recipe for disconnection and this sort of falling down the rabbit hole of anger and frustration. And like, I think there's a place for anger and outrage. I think there's a place for anger and outrage in civilized conversation and debate. And I don't ever want to imply that there is not. I run real hot. And so I just think that like there's a place for that. I wonder if your campus community could benefit from either some guidelines or conversations or just clarification about, sometimes when I'm speaking, I'm just trying to be heard. I need to feel heard, especially if you are a minority or a minority perspective of any kind in a law school environment. Like, you feel silenced even when you're not being silenced. And so if there is a place to say, right now I just need to feel heard. I'm not trying to broach a policy debate with you right now, or a legal debate, or I'm not writing a brief. I'm sharing my perspective. That's different. But I'm interested to see what Beth thinks.
Difficulty that I had in private practice. So let me tell you this. I went to law school. I graduated. I went to become an associate at a Midwestern regional firm. And when I was recruited to that firm, one of the partners who interviewed me was sitting in front of his Supreme Court memorabilia. He had a very distinguished career as a labor lawyer. And he was nearing retirement. And he said to me, you really have a lot going for you here, because you have a great resume. Plus you have this story of coming from a dairy farm in nowhere, Kentucky, and you don't have too much of an accent. And it was a really reductive moment for me that I struggled to get over. He had retired by the time I actually joined the firm. But I sort of came in feeling what Sarah just mentioned, kind of silenced without anyone actually silencing me. I sort of walked in knowing that I wasn't exactly who usually comes to this party. And it was really difficult for me to navigate that challenge through the course of my career. But I was so glad, as I did, that I had some experiences in law school that made me feel like I was on a different planet. There were moments in law school discussions when I heard people, it was mostly around reproductive rights, when I heard people using language that was, in my mind, just wildly extreme. I remember a classmate talking about the genocide of babies and just thinking, what is happening here? And that was really valuable to me, that I had that confrontational, heated, emotional, unpleasant law school experience when I got into a workplace that presented me with lots of people who had lots of different feelings about the world and lots of different feelings about me. And so one thing I want to share, even though it doesn't get at all to the personal aspect of wondering how another person could possibly stand for what they stand for or believe what they believe, is that you are in an educational environment, and there is value in having this very intense, heated conflict as part of your education. And when it becomes too frustrating for you or too hot for you, certainly do what you need to do to take care of yourself. But I hope that a piece of that can be coming back to, this is part of my training, because there will not be a single place in my life where I don't encounter someone similar to this person that I'm encountering right now. And wherever you go, someone will have a perspective that makes you feel reduced in one way or another. And I think that there is some value in fleshing that out amongst your colleagues in this environment where everybody's also being trained to argue more effectively. Now, that doesn't mean that we compartmentalize everything perfectly. There are certainly places where that's going to be harder than others. But trying to see, if not the value in the idea, or even the person who has the idea, the value in the discussion and the value in the conflict as you develop yourself as a professional, I hope could be helpful.
You know what else I would say about this idea, that it has escalated in the face of technology, being away from each other face to face. That's not really just a function of the technology. That's a function of the circumstance that created the need for the technology. Everyone is under enormous stress and anxiety. I don't care who you are. I don't care what school you're in. I don't care where you live. I don't care if you wear a mask or not. Like, everyone, there is enormous pressure and tension and anxiety right now. And everyone is feeling that. And so some of the, yes, it is easier to exercise that through a group thread, but sometimes what they're exercising is not what they say they're exercising. Sometimes what they're exercising is their own stress and anxiety, or as we say in the South, you don't know the rock in my shoe. So I think that that's always really important to keep in mind. Does the technology exacerbate it? Absolutely. But so does the global pandemic. And so does a racial reckoning that this country has never seen. And so does a presidential election. Like, all of those things, and everyone's personal economic pressure and family situation I just think you have to always take that into account when you're looking at how people are, the choices people are making right now. Because sometimes they're not even choices, they're just reactions.
I guess I also wonder how technology can be helpful to you in this circumstance, because, an experience that I'm seeing in boards that I sit on is that the technology is in some ways a great equalizer. Not having an overbearing presence in the room, a person who's physically overbearing sometimes, enables us to speak more evenly. I think there are ways to use the technology to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard. And I'm curious about whether you're experiencing that at all in this conflict. The other thing I wonder, because we started talking about this in generalities, which is how all of us talk about politics, but I wonder if there's something more specific than we feel a general sense of hostility toward us, or I don't understand how you could embody the ideals of this institution. I mean, those are both totally valid things to say, but I wonder how much you have gotten into more specific conflict, and if there's value articulating what's behind those general statements.
I mean, yeah. I guess that just prompts the question, like, and we don't have to, don't have to go there right now if you don't want to, but like Alyssa or Rhea, I guess, would be the right people for that. Is it, I guess, right, like what Beth is saying, is there any level of specificity that we can go to there? If that makes any sense?
Wait, so can you rephrase your question in a different way, please?
Well, I think that, yeah, sorry, that wasn't very clear. Beth was basically just saying, what specific contexts do these types of flare-ups arise, or what attributes of what attributes of the Federalist Society or generally right-leaning policy are the biggest hangups that we have been seeing?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of, like, I would say, policy topics that people tend to butt heads on a lot from like the right and the left of the law school. One of them is LGBTQ rights. We have very strong opinions on both sides and very strong groups on both sides. We also have very strong opinions and groups when it comes to reproductive justice. I think that's another big topic that people butt heads on a lot. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement of the summer, and the, like Sarah was saying, the like racial like reckoning that we've had to basically face this summer, I think that has also led to a lot of butting heads, in the sense that people don't know where each side lies in some aspects, and what's going too far from one side, what's not. And I mean, I think Alyssa can talk about the latter the best, but I think it's definitely like those, I would say, are the three big issues aside from the election and everything.
So just to speak to the racial reckoning issue, I think for me, it's really hard because, well, for example, specific issue like police accountability, right? A lot of right-leaning people do not believe in that whatsoever. And for me, it just breaks my heart that somebody could have the belief that, and of course, I'm not necessarily saying that you have this belief, Seth, but somebody could believe that, like, oh, I value a badge over a body, a badge over my body. And I mean, that just gets to like the anger portion that we were talking about earlier, like, what do you do when you have a lot of righteous anger, and like everything that went on over the summer when it was Breonna Taylor, when it was George Floyd. And it's like, the phrase Black Lives Matter shouldn't be seen as a controversial thing to say, but yet here we are tiptoeing around it. People won't utter it from their lips, and it's just like, I feel like something like racial justice should not be a left versus right thing. But to speak candidly, I definitely do believe that's what it has become, and that's something that I deeply struggle with.
Can I ask the Federalist Society folks how you all are discussing the reckoning with systemic racism that the country is processing right now? I'm not asking you to take on the whole of the organization nationwide, but here locally, what are your conversations about this looking like?
Yeah, Yeah, well, I think I'll just start by being very clear about the fact that, like, I think, and this may be part of the frustration, is that we are unable to, as a prudential matter, take any specific policy position. Like, just the nature of the Federalist Society is that we don't take policy positions. And I think that that sometimes frustrates people, because what we are about, I think, to Sarah's earlier point, is the kind of cool, disinterested policy discussion that I just don't think that we're very well equipped to have the, like, very fiery policy discussion that needs to happen. It's much more an academic type of debate format. So, for example, this semester, we felt very strongly that there needed to be the academic discussion of police reform. So at the beginning of the semester, we had a discussion about qualified immunity as a legal doctrine and where we're supposed to go on that. And then this past week, and this actually led to a very large GroupMe flare-up, which is just kind of crazy to even say it's a GroupMe flare-up, but that, that's what it is. We had a kind of more of a general debate on police reform. And I think, coming from our organization's perspective, we tried to balance the intellectual perspective by bringing a very libertarian police reform is necessary viewpoint. Who is that? Is that me? Oh, sorry. Anyway,
That was me. I'm so sorry.
Totally okay. So we've got, like, a very libertarian person, a very tough on crime, whatever that means, conservative person, and then a quite liberal professor at the school moderated it. But those were all three white men. And that, I think, is what caused the confusion, because we see that as a very diverse panel, because I think we're looking at it as a viewpoint, and other people don't see it the same way. So that is specifically what has caused the most recent trouble, I think. But I think that Alyssa's question is a good one. How do we justify what is supposed to be kind of a very academic organization with what I will concede and will readily support, Alyssa, is a very righteous anger.
And I think that is, so I had two thoughts when we first started talking about the Federalist Society. The first was, I don't think the Federalist Society should have to carry how Donald Trump talks about the Federalist Society, and then therefore carry everything that Donald Trump stands for. Let me disclose my bias. I disagree with not a single thing in the Federalist Society. I can get really, really upset about Antonin Scalia, like really fast. I run hot. And so let me just disclose that bias. But I don't think that's how when we started talking about it, I thought, okay, I don't think you should have to carry that. What you just said, though, I will say, I get the cool-headed academic approach. I would say, if you care about the health and the perception of your organization, you have to be curious and open-minded about when that approach will harm your organization, right? Like you just said, when something like that, like a topic that is so charged, to come in with three white men and say, we're the cool-headed ones going to really show y'all the reason of this and really take it apart academically, that's a big lift. You got to think about, does your organization have the capital to make that lift? That's a political calculus. And I think sometimes that's hard in a law school setting, because you want to be cool-headed and reasonable and logic, and we're going to write it like it's brief. But these are people, and sometimes you got to make an emotional political calculus. And Alyssa, what I was going to say for you, I'm going to recommend this book to everybody. This book cracked my whole approach wide open. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And it's about, he's a moral philosopher. I think that's the right word. And he breaks down these approaches and these 5 values. It's care, fairness, respect for authority, loyalty to the group, Those are always the 4 I can list. I can't remember the 5th one. But there's like a purity, I think is one of them. And he talks about how it is when you are so people on the progressive side are usually more oriented towards care and fairness. People on the conservative side are more oriented towards loyalty to the group and respect for authority. And it feels like you're walking in another planet to think about, like, why would that be the thing that motivates you? Because it feels like whatever motivates you should motivate everybody. But I think he makes a really good case that there is a need for everything. Now, I think what gets messed up in law school, and when we try to approach this cool-headedly and logically, is that we think it should be 50-50. So like we just had a whole conversation about Amy Coney Barrett. And I said, I agree with nothing she says, not like nothing. But I don't disagree with her presence on like a 21-member Supreme Court. It's not that I disagree with the perspective. It's not that I want to make the Federalist Society illegal. I don't think either of you are arguing that the Federalist Society should be stripped from its standing on campus, right? Like that's not the point. But I want it weighted appropriately. I want it given the perspective and the foundation and the surroundings so that it can thrive in what it wants to do, right? Like forcing a Federalist Society into a conversation about police, like in that object, that is harmful to the organization, right? That spends political capital that perhaps you don't have. And it harms everybody's perspective. You see what I'm saying? Like, in order, I think, for every perspective to thrive and flourish, we got to figure out what we're trying to do, what what that organization is best suited to do. So like if I'm in charge of the Federalist Society and now you have Amy Coney Barrett, then yeah, I want the Federalist Society to come in and tell me why they think that Amy Coney Barrett is suited for the Supreme Court. I would come to that. I want to hear that. I want to hear why. I want to hear a cool-headed legal approach to why you think she's suited to the Supreme Court. Because that's your girl, right? That makes sense. That's that's the expertise. But I want to hear Alyssa's organization about police reform, right? Like that's where the capital to me makes sense. Like does the way I'm talking about this, does that make sense? Like to think about the health of your organization, the expertise of your organization, and with that particular topic, are we talking about we need to be heard, or we're looking for policy solutions? Like, it's almost like you need to think about, well, where is this, in which realm is this particular controversy? And I think in law school, we want to think they all take place in that academic, cool-headed, reasonable logic realm. And I think what you're finding in your group me's or whatever they're called is that is not always the case. You know what I mean?
Can I talk about that for a second? So Sarah runs hot and I run cold. And I think that a lot of our policy preferences end up being informed by personality, and much of the way that we engage with other people is informed by personality. And so the most useful tool that we have with each other is annotating those conversations. So we're not just having the policy disagreement, we're also talking about how we're talking. And I think that could be useful, because sometimes when I start saying, well, I want to have this academic, intellectual discussion, I am devaluing, without intending to, Sarah's approach. Sarah's as smart as I am. I am sure that Alyssa's as smart as you are, Seth, and that, everybody matches up intellectually. And so sometimes when we say, I want to have it in this tone or in this framework, we're being dismissive of the other person without intending to. And that happens with me when people talk about how much they love Sarah's passion, and it devalues my quieter approach, as though I don't have passion or emotion or feeling, because it's not coming across in the same way that hers is. And I know that's all really like marriage counseling stuff to bring into law school, where we don't like to do that. But I can tell you that our law firms are healthier when we do that stuff and we use those techniques. And it's the only way to get through this kind of political conflict, because otherwise you're going to be engaged in this zero-sum thing where something flares up every once in a while and everybody carries the tension of the latest flare-up until the next one. And so I think what would be really useful for all of you when these things arise is to try to step back and say, how are we talking about it? when you say, I see a diversity of perspective in this panel, what I hear you saying is that there is no value to someone's personal life experience, that it's all about the theory. Okay, when you say you're offended that I have 3 white male speakers, I hear you saying they can't add anything of value to the conversation. Is that what you mean? And we go back and forth and get to what we're actually talking about, and then we can return to the policy discussion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful framework, especially I feel like given the climate, it's really hard to just go immediately to like what you're feeling and then almost like you're shouting at each other and there's no actual conversation happening. Professor Collis, I'm actually also really interested in what you might have to say about this. I know you're starting the free speech and religion clinic at UT, and I'm just curious about your thoughts when it comes to academic conversation versus life experiences.
Well, I'm all for both, and I'm all for a multitude of perspectives and approaches to things. I was actually, the whole time everyone's been talking, I was thinking about how, so I don't fit easily into any one box. My view on any given topic could be considered conservative, liberal, or libertarian, depending on the topic. And there's a whole lot of topics I feel like I just don't know enough about or haven't intersected with enough to have a really strong opinion about. And what that ends up meaning for me practically is I end up feeling like everyone could get mad at me. And no matter who I'm talking to, whether it's a FedSoc audience or ACS or some other group, that they could get angry with me just depending on what topic we happen to be discussing and the approach I take. And I was trying to figure out though how, generally speaking, though, I tend to get along with everyone. My students all do well. I tend to build good connections, and I was trying to figure out why. And I was thinking about it. And one approach that I think would be really helpful in this environment for all the students on all sides is to assume, generally speaking, that the people you're dealing with have the best intentions. That you actually do want the same policy outcomes at the end of the day. I think more often than not, the debate tends to be over what's the best approach to it. But in my world, I have a lot of people who are both on the far right, far left, and everywhere in between that I deal with all the time. And I've yet to meet someone, at least in my circle, who actually wants to see a world where, there's massive inequality and there's massive wealth inequality and there's massive racial inequality. I've never met that person. Where I see the disputes happening is assumptions that people want those things one way or the other, or assumptions that people might be socialists or whatever you want to call it. And the problem there is you end up fighting over caricatures of each other. You don't end up debating your best ideas and the most complex thoughts and feelings you're having. You're debating silly caricatures that are pretty easily shot down. They're straw man arguments, and they really don't get at the heart of the matter. What I would recommend folks do is, if you see someone that you just do not understand their position at all, and they may not be the best spokesperson for their position, quite frankly, is go find the absolute best spokesperson for the side that you disagree with, and really come to understand where they're coming from and what their views are and how they reach the conclusions they did, and then try to grapple with that. And I think it'll help you appreciate their humanity a lot more, rather than simply silencing them or refusing to listen, or just assuming that they are nothing more than the caricature you have in your head. So those are just a few thoughts that I had. I think they're the approach that I often take when we talk about speech or First Amendment issues. I'd rather have all the ideas out on the table, and I'd rather have us all trying to, not just listening. I want to emphasize that it's not just listening to what other people have to say, but affirmatively going out and trying to understand where they're coming from so that you can actually deal with that. And that would include not just listening to the academic legal arguments, but also listening to the emotions and the heartache and the pain that people have gone through. Try to understand it all if you can. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's what was going through my head as everyone was talking.
I will say what you said just then reminded me of something I read recently that was really powerful and really kind of like illuminating. Because I do think that privilege has to be acknowledged inside conversations when we're trying to understand each other. And the woman I was listening to described it as circles contained within circles, and privilege operates the amount of perspective we see. So if we are operating under, so I'm a white woman, a straight white woman, cisgender white woman. So I am usually pretty aware of white men, because I have to be aware, because that's the higher privilege, the inner circle, right? That I'm aware of their perspective because I have to be, because I'm sort of on the outside looking in. And then it kind of moves out from there based on LGBTQ status or race or socioeconomic. But the idea was that the less privileged you are, actually the more aware you are of those other perspectives, because you have to be for your own survival. And that you really do have a better, more complex understanding of these other perspectives than the inner perspectives have looking out. And I thought of that because one of the most illuminating experiences I had in law school was in a class called Race, Crime, and Politics, in which at 21 years old, I realized from listening to all my classmates that people got pulled over for things besides speeding, because that's the only thing I had ever been pulled over for. That's the only thing anybody I knew had ever been pulled over for. But listening to my classmates talk about the other things they'd been pulled over for, I was like, oh, wait, hold on, what? What do you mean broken taillight? I don't understand. That's not a thing people get pulled over for. And they're like, no, that's not a thing white ladies get pulled over for. And it was just at that moment when you realize, like, they understand a lot of what it's like to operate in the world as I do, but I don't understand anything about how it is to operate in the world, and I do. And giving that, but I appreciate in that moment exactly what the professor just described, that they gave me the benefit of the doubt, that I just didn't understand, that it wasn't, I didn't feel, I just felt like it was a, let us show you, let us share, not let's shut you down. How ignorant could you possibly be? I was given a lot of benefit and the doubt in that moment. And I think that's why I look back on that particular class period as like a positive part of my development, as opposed to, a moment where I was defensive and shut down and didn't take in that lesson and really make it a part of who I was. And I think that's the challenge. I mean, I think the idea, like Rita said at the beginning, is, do you want to influence? Because if you want to influence, you cannot do that if the other person is feeling shamed or defensive. But sometimes sometimes the goal might not be to influence, truly. And I don't think it has to be all the time. I think it is not everyone's job to influence and educate the entirety of the population on their experience. That's too big of a burden to bear for some people. And so I just think that annotating, like Beth said, and like sort of being aware, like, and if you aren't aware or if you're struggling, asking. I think that in an educational environment, more than in a workplace environment or even in personal relationship, there is space for that.
I think that sense of giving the benefit of the doubt is really important. I think the other thing is, even where you meet someone who seems to you to be a caricature of a position, which happens sometimes. Sarah and I had a conversation with a nurse from Venezuela who was taking care of a patient who, when she was in the hallway, she heard him speaking about immigrants in ways that were exceptionally derogatory. And she was struggling as an immigrant herself. English was her second language. She still has lots of family in Venezuela about whom she was very worried at the time that we were speaking with her. And she's taking care of this person who was using all kinds of language about her, who absolutely seemed a caricature of a certain position to her. And she was still caring for this person. And she said to us, like, how do I make sense of this? And all we could really offer her is that you treat this person with love for you, not for him. He can't receive that from you, and that's fine. But you do it for you, because you cannot take on everyone's opinion of you in the world and carry that all day, every day, without burning out. And that's true whether you're feeling a sense of hostility towards directed at you because of your beliefs, or a sense that someone else doesn't value you enough. Carrying that around all the time is a recipe for you to just be worn out and ineffective at all the things that you want to do in the world that are for good. And so I think another thing for you all to think about as you go on with this is, even if you can't find spaces where you feel like there's value in the other organization's position, where you still can't understand, how could you associate with this or that? How could you look at me this way? Why are you saddling me with all this baggage? Whatever it is, you walk back from some of that just as an act of self-care, because you will encounter that outside of your law school experience as well. And this is a good place to work that out with each other. And I think in terms of the technology and the places you find yourself, a way to use the technology for good is to have some kind of shortcut where you just throw up the flag and say, I need to step back from this right now. I will come back. We will talk about it again, but I have to call it right now for myself, because this is becoming too much for me. And then we respect that in each other instead of criticizing that or viewing it as weakness or characterizing it as intellectual weakness. I think there's way too much drama right now among adults about people like cowering away. Oh, you can't answer me. If you won't go point for me 90 comments deep on this post, you must be conceding something. So don't do that to each other. Like, I think a good ground rule would be, we don't do that to each other.
I also want to say to all of you, whatever is happening in the 90 comment threads, you are all still young. And this is not failing, this is learning. Like, you're not failing at this. You're figuring out how to do it. You're learning, you're doing exactly what you're supposed to in an educational setting. You're bumping up against each other. You're figuring out what hurts, what works. That sharp edge on that person didn't work for me. My sharp edge hurt that person. Like, these are, when I look back at law school, that's the stuff that stayed with me. That's the stuff that changed me. I don't remember a lot of the actual law. That sounds bad for the professors. I don't mean that the way it sounds. I learned so much, but I'm not a practicing attorney, so a lot of it is like not all there anymore. But those lessons, how to think, how to interact, and not just like lessons, but like relationships, connections, the way that my classmates, who are now some of my best friends in the world, worked on me. I was texting with two of my best law school friends today. It was about boots, not the Federalist Society, but priorities, what they may be in the pandemic. And I just think like I just want y'all to know that I don't want you to see this as like we're screwing up. I don't think that's what's happening. Even everybody, like, it's members of Congress are behaving, I'm going to say passionately. I'm going to give a lot of grace. Passionately, people are mouthing off in interviews. United States senators are behaving in ways, you know what I mean? Like, I think everybody's running hot right now. And that's okay. That's a good sign. I hope what that means is that we are really going through a transition, and we and our systems will come out better and stronger on the other side. And hopefully, as law students, you guys will play a really, really important role in that transition. And the conversations you're having now and the lessons you're learning and the things you're figuring out will be essential to that role, and will be essential to the insight and the skills that you bring to whatever the next 20, 30 years holds for our country.
I think Kylie had a question.
Yeah, so you both have spoke a lot about how to offer love and understanding and acceptance to individuals, and really listening to what they have to say and what they're feeling, and academically what they're thinking. And I think that's really important and valuable. But as somebody who is incredibly non-confrontational, I have a really difficult time seeking that kind of understanding from others. When I tend to engage in political conversations, I actually don't engage. I let others tell me their opinion, and then I will politely change the subject or not and say, yeah, no, I understand. Like, that sucks, or that's crazy. I hear you. But I have a hard time finding the courage or the firmness to express my own opinion and seek that same understanding that I'm trying to offer others. So I was wondering if you guys could give any tips on how to respectfully engage in those conversations, but also ensure that your own voice is heard in a firm way and seek that kind of understanding and acceptance that we also offer.
Well, I think you have to start with seeing your capacity for listening to other people as a gift. So know that you're building a lot of trust and credibility by listening to other people. The folks who come to us saying, I just want this person to listen to me, we always say, well, then you're going to have to listen to them for a long while, probably first. So know that you're giving yourself runway to speak by doing all of that listening that you're doing. And the more you can ask questions, I have like little words and phrases that I use in these conversations. When I'm not ready to speak, I'll just listen to the person. And when they stop, I'll say, can you say more about that? Or that's a really interesting perspective I've not heard before. I'd love for you to tell me more, or where that formed in you, what life experience led you to see this way. So I can keep a person talking while I think about what I might want to say back to them. And then I like to ask for people's permission. So if I've listened to someone, as it sounds like you do, just saying, are you interested in my perspective on this? They're not going to say no, usually. It's very rude for them to do that. But asking the question also resets the table, because now this is consensual. I'm not forcing my opinion on them. I'd be happy to walk away without sharing it. They've agreed to it. And there's something in that agreement that helps people be more receptive to what you have to say. And then I always just try to start with, here's how I see this now, because that framing also takes some of the heat out. I'm not saying that everything you've just told me is wrong and I'm about to bless you with my wisdom. Here's how I see this now. Or I'm with you all the way through here, and then this is our point of departure because I go in this direction. This happens with Sarah and I all the time. Like the professor was saying, we fundamentally agree on almost everything that falls under the heading of values or outcomes for society. We do have different strategies about how to get there. And using that kind of language about it. I'm with you, this is what I'm looking for too. I would take a different strategy to get there because blah. But if you can kind of set up in your mind some language that you're comfortable with and just recycle it all the time and enter those conversations prepared for that moment when you say, are you interested in my perspective? Here it is. I think you'll find that it gets easier and easier and that people will be really warm to you because you've been listening to them.
And because I'm a person that often bulldozes people in conversation, let me share with you, my friends, what they have done that actually gets my attention and gets me to stop bulldozing. I mean, a lot of times I think it is them articulating, this is really hard for me to share. Or I'm not 100% how I feel about this. Or maybe you are, right? Maybe the idea is, I feel really passionately about this. I'm worried you're going to interrupt me. Or I'm worried, I'll have people say, I want to talk back. I want to have this conversation with you, but I'm afraid you're going to bulldoze me. Because nobody wants to be the bulldozer, even those of us aware that we are the bulldozer. And so when people in conversation say, I want to share this, it's difficult for me because I don't like conflict, but I think this is important. You know, we just had my best friend on our podcast, and we've been having a 20-year-long conversation about abortion, but there was definitely a point in our relationship where she said, I don't like conflict as much as you. I care about this stuff, but I just like, you like it more than I do. And sometimes I just need a break. Like sometimes I don't want to do this. I don't want to argue about this till midnight. Like sometimes I'm done and you need to respect that. And so I think that some like just boundaries within the relationship, or just articulating, being vulnerable and saying, I really want to share my perspective, but conflicts makes me uncomfortable. So I need you to give me a little grace. I think that can be really powerful too.
Well, I want to thank y'all all for being here. We have one more question, and then we promise we'll let y'all get back to your kids and families and have your Tuesday night back. But I think we've talked a lot about what we as individuals can do in our own capacity to foster more civil discourse and have, graceful conversations, like you guys said. But I'm really curious, and I think the rest of the students here are too, and I mean, I think I would like to open this up to professors and the dean especially, is you guys have done a really good job of, trying to combat some of the very tense situations, but what can we as students expect from the law school administration and the professors and the rest of the admin moving forward, just to ensure that like what happens in the next month doesn't lead to 1.5 more years, 2.5 more years of just not being able to even be in the same con law class as someone you might disagree with? And maybe Dean Farnsworth, if you want to take that question first.
Well, tell me, what would you like to see? What would you like to see from your law school on this?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess for me personally, one thing that I know I've dealt with, I guess personally, is I have friends from both sides of the aisle. And it seems like that's not normal, and my friendship get kind of scrutinized, and it's a lot of pressure because I feel like people are always viewing my friendships in a certain light that they wouldn't view other people's friendships, and it's a lot of pressure. But I also think it's been beneficial for me. I grew up in Abilene, and so I joke that if I was friends with only liberals, I would never have any friends. So it's something I've worked on for 22 years now, and it's beneficial for me, but I don't see those relationships happening. And so for me, who's friends with Seth and Kylie, but also Alyssa, it's like a unicorn almost. And I think it's really helpful if there's a way to foster these conversations, but I'm not sure how we do that in a way that, gets people to actually show up to the table and gets people in a way to like actually have them. So for me, that's would be my big thing, is finding a way to have these conversations in a really meaningful and respectful way, kind of like we're doing right now.
One of the best ways, if you want to build those relationships that are based on trust, and even where you can influence each other and where you can begin to give that benefit of the doubt, is to work together towards a common goal and not just a law degree. But, I think that no matter where all of you are coming from or wherever your classmates are coming from, you would agree that there are a lot of Americans and a lot of people probably in the community surrounding your law school that are in a great deal of need. So a shared service project, or the other thing that came to mind now, I think they're only doing phone banking right now, but when I was in law school, all my law school classmates and I did election protection during the presidential election, and it was one of my best experiences, because we all got together and we all disagreed on lots of things, and we went to Philly and we poll watched and we helped people with their election questions. I think that I don't know if this is a year, if y'all are all in the same year or something like that. If your class could take on something like that together, so that you could sort of have a common goal, have a common project, and remember there are things that you do share some values, there are things that are important to all of you, and to work towards those, food banking or poll watching or whatever. I still believe that there are things, there are unifiers, even in 2020, that we can all agree with, that there are people going hungry right now, that there are people that need legal services and legal protection. So I wonder if that would also be really, really helpful.
I have one suggestion as well. It's, to me, an amazing thing that your dean and two of your professors are with you for this conversation. This wouldn't have happened in my law school. And so where you have this level of openness from the administration, another thing to think about is, I absolutely agree, being a lawyer is so much about being a master at compartmentalization. And my experience practicing was that compartmentalization academically can be very stimulating and fun and rewarding, and compartmentalizing on the personal side can be really draining. And you need a lot of infrastructure behind you to manage that drain and not let it wear you down. And so you might think about what kind of support services the law school offers, and what kind of connections to resources the law school offers for helping everybody as individuals build that infrastructure. It was very important to me throughout my time in private practice that I be able to work with a therapist and have that support system in place to talk about what it felt like when a partner at the firm who worked with me and invited me to a charity event mistook me for one of the teachers of the organization we were there to support. You know, those experiences where you just get cut away at. And that happens a lot less to me as a white woman than my colleagues of color. Those experiences where people are cutting away at you take a lot of infrastructure behind you to keep you going and moving forward, and acknowledging other people's humanity and integrity and value and work ethic and all of the things that we see in each other beyond our politics. And so maybe since you have an invitation to say, what would you like to see from your law school administration, you can be thinking about some of those resources that could be behind these conversations as well.
Professor Dickerson and Professor Collis, did you have any closing remarks you wanted to say on the topic?
Well, I'll say there are now 2 of us on the call who are unicorns. So you're not by yourself as a unicorn. It's probably because I grew up in Memphis, and the people that I went to high school with are the ones that the press and social media refer to as non-college white, middle-aged non-college whites who all wear red hats a lot. And it's been, we've had to sort of navigate our Facebook friendship over the last 4 to 8 years, but we've, managed a way to do it. One of the things that you might also want to consider is when you're sort of opportunities, not within the building, within sort of Zoom screen, take classes where you can have conversations that maybe make you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but aren't necessarily confrontational. I will say that for me, the students who have consistently taken my classes over the last 20 years typically fit into 3 buckets. Jewish women, gay males of color, and conservative white males in the Federalist Society. And I've never understood what it is, sort of what feral scent I give off that would attract all those groups. But if you can find classes with, Seth is taking a class, and so, could there be a group of you that take the class so that you have a certain comfort zone in the class, you're not going to be attacked, where you can have conversations. Again, I'm not saying everybody has to deal with confrontation, but just classes that maybe push your views. And that may be another way for you to be able to see how the other side thinks without having to stop them in the hallway and get into some kind of an argument.
That's such good advice. That's what we tell people about media too. Like, don't go 180, just go like 90 and see where that takes you. And that race, crime, and politics class, I was the only person in that class that looked like me. I don't think it's an accident that's why that was one of the most illuminating experiences of my law school experience. Y'all making me miss law school. I never thought I'd say that.
Just give it a couple of days in law school, and then you won't miss law school anymore. I think I speak for everybody. That's something that we all
I
have
like
in
law
common.
school. I don't like the law school bills. That's what I don't like.
Well,
I love law school.
That we got to take up with the dean. But I appreciate y'all's time. This has been very helpful. But again, like Rhea said, we want to make sure we give back y'all's Tuesday night to you. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank
you so much. This was really fun. And stay in touch. We want to hear how all of you are doing, please.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to echo what Seth said. Thank you guys so much for coming. Like, this is a topic that all of us on this call think is really important, not just for like this election cycle, but just going forward in our careers as lawyers. So we really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.